Welcome to another episode of the Business Speed Podcast. I'm Steve Bridenstine here with Nick Bratton. Again, bringing you some interesting discussions around our speed topics, small business ownership, running these businesses from a distance and in the trenches, and then our leadership piece, always trying to help develop and add value to those around us. Nick, super excited to have this episode going underway. I know that you've expressed that you guys are almost ready to move into the new facility. It gets closer and closer and closer, but there's always those small step backs right before you get there. But how's everything going on your end?
Things are going well. Things are going well. We are having the busiest and most productive spring that we have ever had. And that's from just a foot traffic and revenue standpoint. One of the reasons why, from a revenue standpoint, is because we just went through price increases. And so this is something that in the future, I'm sure we will discuss because it's a difficult conversation to have and something you're always afraid of doing, but it's important, especially with what's going on over the last year. But yeah, things are going well. We're having a really busy spring. We have two new employees who have joined us. One who joined a couple of weeks ago, another one who is joining in 2 weeks. Got a great internship group going right now. Like you alluded to, we're getting ready to move into the new facility here in a couple of weeks. And so a lot of stressful things happening all at one time, but a lot of good stress. And so these are growing pains. We're going to talk about this a little bit in our business segment today, but these are growing pains and they're all good things. It's just, how do you manage it? How do you lead through it? How do you make sure that, it's all good on the back end? So yeah, things are going well here. How are things up there?
It's exciting. Like for us, this is definitely like you're feeling it. It's a little slower. Because of the schedule of the Midwest, right? There's like, it's a hard line of like, all right, now the sports are starting. It's not snowing, even though it's supposed to snow in the next couple of days. Everybody has got sports scheduled right now. So we definitely have a little bit more of like people are in and out as they're training with us. It's hard to have that full commitment to just week after week. They're in 2 to 3 times a week. But we're making the impact with them. And our track athletes have been really solid about coming in 1 day a week to get some touch in. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but a little bit of an influx in our basketball athletes, making that a little bit more of a priority with their athletic development, which is always exciting. I have a personal bias that I just like working with basketball guys. That's my past. So it's always super fun for me to kind of see that carry over to them on the court. And then some personal things. I had an opportunity just yesterday to do a little speed in service for one of the local universities here in Chicagoland. It was really cool to kind of talk with their staff and just kind of shine a light on how we program and think about training when our lens is speed training. And that was kind of the frame that we talked about it through. Was I get it, you guys are from the strength side, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying from my side as the speed side, this is what I value, and this is how I set it up to make sure speed's my priority for my training. And it was a great discussion, tons of just questions, and they were posing some ideas that I thought were awesome too. So it was just a really great atmosphere for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I kind of want to jump into that right away. So, my background is basketball as well. I was in the NBA for a number of years, and this is a tough sport to work with. I love working with basketball guys too, but they are not a group that notoriously lives in the weight room, nor do they want to do a whole lot of training without a ball under their hands. And so, it's interesting to talk to and work with other individuals who train basketball players, specifically basketball strength conditioning coaches. And so I'm really interested to hear what the feedback was like from that staff. So, you did an in-service for them. You talked to them about what you guys do, how you program for it. So what were some of their initial thoughts on, you begin working with basketball players? Obviously they have college athletes. And so, these are developed individuals, most of them. And so, what were some of their thoughts initially about how speed has an impact within training?
Yeah. They were open to the idea that it's something they're unfamiliar with. Right. But at the same time, a common kind of phrase they would say is, we just don't have time to do it. We don't have time to work on it. Like I only see them this many days. It's like, that's okay. Like you definitely get a speed stimulus in that time, right? And then so the discussion kind of quickly was like, well, but for basketball, it's different than this sport because this sport does this and they do that. And I said, okay, that's fair. Like you have a little bit of a lens to say, this is what I always want to work on. And for us, it's we want to work on top speed, acceleration, and then our change of direction is broken up a little bit to have different categories. For each sport, I might say this is more of a priority, and I'm going to hit that more, but I don't abandon any of those three entirely. And that's kind of what I was sharing with them. So they're like, well, with basketball, we never get up in front of ourselves and run full speed. So why would I ever do top speed with them? I said, I totally get it. You know, like that argument has been made. I totally get it. But when you think about top speed for us is it's an efficiency thing where they just run smoother. It's an exposure to velocities that they've never felt before. Posturally, they probably spend a lot of the game closer to top speed postures than they do pure acceleration postures at like, they're not coming out at 45s all the time. They're probably in that like 60 to 85 as far as that goes. But if you do that and you squat while you run, you're putting your hamstrings on blast and you're on your heels a lot. And so we also think about it as your speed reserve to a degree, that concept to say, if I can boost up my max velocity, everything else becomes a little easier. And I might pull everything else with their ability to run faster and move faster. And that was something that was a little foreign as I discussed it. But as we went through it, there was a lot of head nodding where you're like, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Right. And so the big thing was, but do we just start doing flying tens? I said, that would probably be a bad idea because they've not done it and they've spent 3 years not being exposed to it. So instead of doing sprint performance at top speed, like flying tens, you kind of spend more time doing like drills at volume to you're getting exposure then to those positions without the intensity that they might pull something. And they said, like, what? I said, like, your simple dribble runouts, your ankle dribbles, your calf dribbles, dribbles to run and then sprint and just kind of control their velocities a little bit to say, like, don't go full. And then you set up your wickets intentionally to have them run through wickets and do little buildups where they're just running taller and smoother. I said that's as simple as it needs to be early on with your guys to start to build in that feeling of it. But I recently started working with a basketball kid who's trying to transition to track. And basketball players, by nature, I was telling them, like, they run really fast sometimes in acceleration, like when we laser them, and it looks absolutely horrible. But they run really fast because they're like bouncy, twitchy athletes. And so he ran, and day one was absolutely terrible. Like it's flying 10. I didn't really have him run a full fly, but he ran like a 105, flying 10 yard. And I gave him like a 15, 20 yard lead in just to be safe. 2 weeks later, we'd just been doing like drill work for that. He just hit a 0.971.
Wow.
In spikes because like he just never had done it. His body was twitchy. I could tell it. He had no idea how to get in front of himself, but now he opened up and just ran, and it was ridiculous. Like he went from like a 105, then a 103, 101, and then 0.97 after we did like a little overspeed on 1080 to potentiate that. But it's like they have it in them and it's safe. They just have never done it and felt it before. But that was like a real quick, like one of the main things that we talked about was like, how do you do that? And then how do you kind of structure in and build out acceleration work in a limited amount of time? And how do I warm up with a limited amount of time? That was where they were kind of getting fixated on was
sure.
I have 40 minutes to do all of this. How do I get all this stuff in? And I said, like, our warm up is like 11 minutes, but it goes, you're pretty quick and you're pretty intentional about the things you do, but it smoothly transitions into training. I said, like, I think sometimes where we get caught as strength coaches and for different sports is like, we have this very intentional warm up that doesn't really feel like sprinting or jumping. And then we try to sprint and run. And it's like these two separate workouts almost, where you can kind of blend them together more. And there's a lot of things you do that are almost like sprints that can be categorized as warm up, but it really gets you ready to sprint faster, you know? So have you had those discussions too, Nick, where it's like, the biggest thing is like this time concern and then they just never get in those positions. So why would I train them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so this past summer, I spoke at the Texas High School Coaches Association, and that was my whole presentation is microdosing speed.
Yeah.
You know, because again, everybody thinks a speed session needs to be an hour long, and a speed session can literally be in season. It could be 15, 20 minutes on the front end of practice,
Yeah.
and so, and one of the things that we talked about, as you were alluding to, is you shouldn't be able to tell where the warm up ends and the workout begins, because the warm up looks so much like the workout and the workout looks so much like the warm up, and so blending those drills, as you were kind of alluding to, using the dribbling series, using your form running as part of building into the workout. We talked about this in episode 3 of this season, and using our form running drills to prime and even strengthen our hip flexors, but using drills like form running technique drills, dribble series, building into the wicket runs, using med ball punch, PVC overhead runs, using constraints as far as how you're holding your arms as you're going through movements or changing your postures, and then getting into the acceleration drills. And at that point, your max velocity drills may only be 3 or 4 repetitions. As we were working with our soccer team this year, we got toward the end of the season, and again, our team made it to the state finals, first time that's ever happened in history. We get to the end of the season and we're getting 2 or 3 max velocity reps in. That's it. But that's all they need. That's all the system needs at this point. It doesn't need a massive stimulus. It just needs a reminder of, what are you able to do? Are you able to touch it? And so, yeah, just using short pieces there. Now, I want to kind of cycle back to your conversation here.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, what were they doing? What have they been doing? And what did you propose? Or if you didn't propose anything, what would you propose to a program like this?
Yeah. So they weren't doing a ton. I think they were doing what we would typically assume they do, right? And I gave them credit for this. I said, I imagine you guys are doing your A marches, your A skips, you're doing some wall stuff, you do some sleds, and then you do some timed runs, not really like laser timed, more like 3/4 court runs, things like that is what they were spending more of their time doing. So you'd like look at that and you'd say, that checks the box. Like, you're definitely doing intentionality behind that, right? But I was just encouraging them that you can train them a little bit more with the emphasis of, like, we want to be as fast as possible. And that's where, like, my lens of suggestion was coming from, was like, here's what I would do if I'm really, speed is what I'm checking the box on for these guys. And one of the biggest things was I structured their warm up differently that they've never thought about. And I said, for us, we were influenced several years ago. We had a coach that went through like Exercise's program, and they're very structured with how they do their warm-ups. There's a lot of boxes and categories that you're going through. And I told them, like, we like to have these categories because it provides structure and repeatability, and it allows us to scale and progress it. But there's hundreds of things that might fit into these boxes for whatever you like. And so our first box for us is we're trying to get like some sort of activation going. And for what we currently do, it's ISO work. So we're doing like ISO lunges, straight leg, single leg glute bridges, lateral wall holds, different ankle positions as far as being up on the toe, flat footed. But we're doing holds, maybe up to 15 seconds. So we do 15 seconds this leg, 15 seconds that leg. Then we do something a little bit more dynamic that might be like leg swings, some cross crawl pattern. Kind of do that, then go back, repeat, and then go back and repeat. Now their temperature's up. You're getting specific kind of joint engagement and the musculature around these joints that we want to get. Then we got to get them moving quickly with some thigh split skips, which is just general movement, right? Thigh split skips, backwards, forwards, high step karaoke, backwards, forwards, or some like over the hurdle, under the hurdle type activity, backwards, forwards. Backwards and forwards always. And then we move from there into like our plyo prep, which we call it, which is where we're doing something that's a little bit more of like a landing focus, not so much on the output focus. So it might be just like a snap down, a drop from a box. Eventually it can be like a drop from a box to a jump, but you've built that to that point. And then you're doing some sort of maybe hop actual performance where it might be hurdle hops and sticks, and then building that out in time to some sort of hopping and bounding that just kind of like leads itself into that more performance-based hopping and bounding variation. Then from there, we move right into our mechanics type stuff. I said early on, you're doing like A holds, maybe wall holds, and you're doing maybe some marches and skips. But later on, that goes straight into like banded marching, banded A runs. They know how to do the marches and skips. So we just get right into the version. And now that's actually like a training stimulus. Out of that, we kind of get a couple like run out variations. Just kind of like shuffle the run out, crossover shuffle the run out, straight leg skip to run out. Something in that nature just kind of like lets them open up and intertwines what we were just doing into actually sprinting. And then if we had shoes off, we put our shoes on. If we just have shoes on, we go right into the next piece, which is actually like a jump performance piece, which what might be like hurdle approach jumps, some ankle jumps, either forward, backwards in place, and then like some bound variations. But you can tie in whatever categories of types of jumps you want to do in that. We go through that maybe 2 or 3 times. And then for us, we always are going to capture some sort of jump data after that. So we prep them up with that circuit, and then we get 2 or 3 broad jumps, 2 or 3 verticals, an RSI, combination of the 2 of those, standing triple jump distance, whatever we want to do, but we're just getting like a check-in on some of their readiness now that they're warmed up. And it actually gives us over time, how are things going? But I just kind of laid that out to them. And I said, they go, man, that's a lot of stuff. How long does that take? I said, 11 minutes. And like, no way. I'm like, guys, these guys have been trained for years and years and years. I get through 11 minutes with like middle school athletes and high school guys. They know these movements. Like, you don't have to coach all these movements like crazy all the time. Like, they can do these movements really well after a while. And some of them are simple. Some of those are just holds. So you can get cranking. And like, that's like 11 minutes. I'm like, yeah, look at all that you got in there in 11 minutes. And then I'm like, then we go right into our top speed stuff. You do your wickets, your form stuff. And then we go right into like whatever your acceleration is. And they didn't have like a great structure yet to like, how do I formulate my days? So I showed them just how we do. Day 1 is our acceleration focus, which means our accelerations are 0 to 15 yards. We have our development of strength in that running. Day 2 for us, because we're doing a 3-day speed development, top speed performance. And then acceleration now is a little bit more technical. So we do like 0 to 10 yards, usually 5 to 10, right? But it allows us to get more volume of like some technique aspects, because we're not having to lengthen out and have to rest extra. And then day 3 for us is your long accelerations, where we're working on transitional speed. So that would be like, we want to have runs that are 15 to 25 yards in length at minimum. You could go further than that, but that's our minimum for that. I said, and you just got to choose kind of what is the necessary thing that you need to work on for that. And you say, like, we need these shorter bursts. We need a little bit more transitional speed. And for you guys, if you're only doing it 1 day a week, you're just kind of picking like, what's the most valuable things. And then you just kind of plan out, how can I progress it? Or do I do 2 weeks of this? And then I kind of 2 weeks where I change the focus a little more. And by focus, it just means I allocate 8 minutes instead of 5, and so that was like where I was making my recommendation was like, this is how we structure an ideal hour-long speed session 3 days a week. But you just condense it into that 1 day or 2 days, and then you just try to prioritize from there. But where I got a lot of feedback that was really positive was that warm-up structure. They really enjoyed that part. Because I think there's always so many boxes sometimes they're trying to check that they lose track of time. And it feels like I can't get into sprinting without doing all of these things first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's awesome. So you were talking a little bit earlier about you have this basketball player that now you're transitioning to track.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of coaches are dealing with this right now. I know I'm dealing with it. I have a lot of basketball players that are transitioning to track, transitioning to baseball, transitioning to lacrosse. And so what are some things that you took into account early on when that training began? What are some of the things, how are you assessing? What are you assessing? And then how is that dictating the program design from there?
I think this is an awesome question that I think we're going to spend another episode on this with the assessment piece for basketball players in particular. But number one, we talk about this all the time. Ankles is like, we assess just how the ankle functions was like the number one thing, because I wanted to understand if he has limitations. Like, I always have a bias for volleyball and basketball when they come in the door that they're going to have probably ankle issues from just rolling their ankles. So I'm always checking to just see if that's the case. And sure enough, he had a little bit of that going with one simple overhead squat, and he's almost falling over. And you're like, okay, this is probably going to be this. And sure enough, we check it. So that's like our starting place with that acceptance piece. And then getting that jumping picture of the different types of jumps we do to get an understanding if he's a little bit more power force driven, or is he a little bit more on the twitchy plyometric side. So I get a little bit of an understanding. Basketball has a tendency to be on the twitchier side, just great ankles and feet. Like, not always that their range of motion is great, but they just can absorb forces quickly, and they're awesome at that. And that's why they run fast, even though they look terrible oftentimes. And so that's where I spent a lot of the time with him early, was trying to get an idea of that. My bias of what it's going to look like when he runs, like I just said, like I figure he's going to be backside, he's going to be squatty, and he's just going to be like running like crazy, but he ran pretty fast. And that was our day one assessment, was kind of going through that. And then he had never seen good running form in his life at that point. And so then I had to show him a couple of the photos we have in the facility as far as shapes that Usain Bolt's creating. I showed him a video of like some slow-mo running of Usain Bolt to just kind of see, like, this is kind of what it looks like when you're upright and running fast. And then from there, we had to just immediately get into wickets that were not overly spaced, because he had a tendency to get squatty and reachy. So we went condensed hurdles and literally ran through it like 75%, probably like 8 times on that first day for 15 yards. And we did that for another session, but then added a little bit of like, you can run and accelerate. So the second session I did with him, we did fly 10s, quote unquote, but he was able to do just a 10-yard lead in and just sprint the whole thing hard. And so he was a little bit more comfortable with that, because he just didn't feel comfortable how to build up yet. And then the third session, after we did a few reps of all of that, I let him actually do a fly 10. And that's when he hit the 0.971.
Yeah.
But I know that you are huge on your assessment, and you guys are very deliberate on getting people from their starting point to where they're going to be at the end. How would you kind of go into that situation? What would be your lens before he even like walks through the door?
Yeah. So, we're very much like you, as far as how we're looking at everybody, the things that we're going to take them through. The things that I'm going to look at immediately, I'm just like you. I'm biased, and I know that these basketball, volleyball players are going to have some issues with their ankles coming in. The other thing is hips. We're in this athletic position so much that I tend to see limitations in hip external rotation. We tend to be really limited in our hamstring flexibility, and so we have issue getting into good hip flexion. We tend to be really tight in the hip flexors too, because they are in this forward position all the time. So we spend a lot of time on the hips. We will measure hip internal external rotation. I will put them through kind of that Thomas test, just having them lie on their back, looking at the passive hip flexion or hip extension, I'm sorry. And so really have them go through that before I even get them moving, because I already have a pretty good idea of once they get moving, it's not going to be what we want to see. Yeah. And so trying to assess, like, what are the restrictions? What are the issues going to be? Are they going to be structural, or are they going to be functional? Because we need to start to take care of the structural very early on, because there's really no need to cue and try to make adjustments from a technique standpoint if they're going to be battling their own build right now. And so getting an idea of what they look like structurally, and then starting to get them into those actual functional movement patterns, and being able to make some of those changes and adjustments there. I do want to say that if you guys have not listened to episode 2 of the podcast, we went into this in detail in episode 2, not specifically basketball to track athletes, but just general off-season transitions, going from one sport to another, what we look at, how we make those adjustments within programming. So again, if you haven't listened to episode 2, go back to season 1, episode 2, and review that. But again, yeah, coming back to what we're talking about here, like I said, look at them structurally, then get them into some of the movement patterns, and then coming back to what you were talking about with the university, get them into some upright positions. I've talked before about our agility-based athletes and really trying to teach them how to get their center of gravity up over the ground, how to, truly extend. We have a large group of volleyball players coming in right now. And one of the things that we are working on is propulsive forces. They really struggle with being able to extend and really drive out because, On a volleyball court, they're very rarely going to do that. Maybe if they're diving, maybe if they're going for a dig, but again, very, very rarely are they going to completely extend and create this large propulsive force and then have to do it repetitively. If they're going for a dig, they do it one time and then they brace themselves on the floor. And so, it's something that's very unnatural to them. And so when we look at going into the training phase, that's what we're really focused on is being able to get comfortable in that extension phase of the sprint, and also being able to get comfortable in that upright position.
I think that's awesome. The topic I'd love to talk about on the next episode is a little bit of kind of profiling these athletes, because I think there's a big opportunity in basketball when you talk about the athletes that are a little bit more force dominant versus the ones that are a little bit more elastic and plyometric by nature. And we can touch more about how I discussed that with the university, but it was a concept they weren't too familiar with either. To say, I just asked them point blank, I go, are you more of a force guy or are you a twitchy guy? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, well, do you run up and jump or do you like to just take a couple steps and jump? He's like, well, I just take like a step and I jump. I'm like, you're force. I'm like, if I did that, I would go nowhere. I need some speed to take off. I said, so I like, you got to kind of keep that in mind too when you're thinking about like when I program and when you're really trying to be the top level version of you as a staff. The lowest level is you create a program that addresses everybody on the team. When you start getting next level is when you start being able to adapt it and create some individual variables to really create some buckets for those guys to take each guy to the next level based on their needs. And that was a really cool concept. So I think that we can talk more about some of the things that go into that on our next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
Love it. So changing topics slightly, because we'll spend 45 minutes to an hour just talking about speed stuff sometimes. It gets us, we can't help ourselves. We're speed coaches at heart.
Right.
Is a topic I think is pretty neat as far as the lens that we have on it, and it's staff retention. And we talk about this a lot because there's an 85% turnover rate in our industry of people within the first 3 to 5 years of their job that they're either going to a new job or they're leaving the industry entirely. And Nick and I have spent so much time on the podcast just discussing ways to keep your staff growing, keep your staff as happy as possible, and keep your staff around because it's huge for the environment of your business. But there are some pros of when staff is changing over. And I think that it's a topic that maybe a lot of owners don't really talk about. But Nick, I'd love to have your insights as far as what are some of those pros, because we've talked about a lot of these pros of keeping your staff and the environment, the culture, the comfortability of your clients with that staff and the quality of the training, but what are some of those pros of if the staff is turning over?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we're going through a lot of right now, and all for good reasons. I think I've had 4 coaches leave in the last, I don't know, 11 months, 10 months. And all for good reasons. One got a position at the U.S. Olympic Training Center. Another one got a position as a director at a baseball facility in Alabama. Another one got a position as a director at a facility closer to home. And so, all growing and accepting better and bigger roles. And ultimately, that's what we want. However, we don't necessarily want it as fast as what we're taking it right now. And so, it's something that's going to happen. And so, I think that it is a good thing. And I'll tell you why it's good for us right now. Right now, for us as a facility, there are growing pains. Our clients are they create great relationships with all of our coaches and they want them to be around as much as they want them to grow as people. They want them to be around because we're comfortable with that. And so we have a little bit of that growing pain just because, we don't have the same personalities around. And so, one of the things that I have to talk to our clients about is, listen, you trusted me to hire them originally. I need you to trust me in this fact that I'm going to bring in a group that's just as good, if not better. And so, having that, but it's cleansing. And so what it does is it allows us as a group to really flush some things out. Not that the last group was bad, but we may not have been as efficient. So for example, one of the gentlemen who just left has been with me for the last 4 years. Well, when he joined, we were a very, very small company. And now we are significantly larger, almost 7 times larger than what we were when he joined. And so a lot of things are very, very different. Our processes are different. Our systems are different. Our roles are different. Early on when he first joined, he and I did everything. And now you only have 1 or 2 roles, but you have to do a lot in those roles. They are very expansive. And so it's cleansing to be able to go through this process of bringing new individuals in, bringing new energy in. And that's something that I really enjoy. I enjoy it when our interns start every semester. I enjoy it when new coaches come in. They bring in new energy. They bring in new stories. They bring in new ways of doing things. And so I think that is a very positive thing. They also bring in a different way of thinking. And so, when these new coaches come aboard, they are going to look at some of the things that we do and say, either maybe I like that, or I feel like I can offer something here. Let me help bring this up to date, or let me give you another idea. And so I think that can be a very beneficial thing as well. But you also bring new energy as far as, I want to be able to offer this, and so, for example, we have a gentleman who's coming in, who's going to be coming from professional baseball, and he has already communicated to me, hey, I want to be able to give you guys insight in this area. I want to be able to bring this program up to speed. I want to be able to do all these other things. And so, as much as I also want to make sure that we're focused on offering a good product that we've always offered, I'm also excited about the fact that we're going to be able to bring some things that we haven't been able to do in the past. And this is an area that we already do really well, but he's going to be able to take us a step further. And so, again, I think that it is good from the standpoint of, we're just going to be able to amplify what we already do and do it at a higher level, and really just take our own business up a step.
Yeah. I love that. One of the things that I felt like you were kind of saying was, it also forces you as the business to get your stuff really in line, to bring those new people up to speed as fast as possible. And like, sometimes when you have a staff that's been there for a while, there's so many things that just get done that don't have real clear processes behind them. And it's like, well, we do this all the time, but it's not like really talked about. It's just what we do. And when somebody new comes on staff, it's like, all right, we got to really like put that on paper and plan that out, because this needs to get done. They're not familiar with it, and they don't have a mentality of, well, that's not how we used to do it. This is now just the way we do it, And I think that there's a great opportunity from the ownership side and the management side, when your staff is heavily turning over, to really try to implement things that you've been maybe thinking about and trying in your leadership wise, maybe different staff meeting structures, different meeting schedules, incorporating different book studies that you want to try and do with this. It's such a great time to do that, because one of the hardest things is when you're trying to like implement that with a staff that's been around forever, it's hard to get all the buy-in sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a history of starting things and you maybe don't follow through great on those things, the staff has a hard time to jump onto that. But if you've been working on yourself in these last months and years, and you're like, no, I can do this, and I want to do it at this great scale, it's an awesome opportunity for that, to just like reset that culture and reset a lot of what that day-to-day feels like.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something we're going through right now. I've completely changed how we do staff meetings. Because, for the longest time, it was really just a quick check-in. Well, the group that I have now cannot take a quick check-in. We need to be talking about more. We need to be going through reminders. We need to be going over things that they may not have experienced up to this point. And it's interesting. You talk about putting the systems on paper and things like that. There are things that you do in your facility that you may not know how they got created. You don't know how that started, who started it, where it came from. it just started one day. And so it's good when these newer individuals are coming in, because you have to think about, okay, well, how am I going to introduce them to that? Who is in charge of that, or who's the point person on these things? And so again, it really forces you to think about all the things that are going on in the business, even the most basic things, and understand, is this a good thing? Is this how I want it done? And how am I going to document it?
Uh, and I think one thing that I've seen repeatedly with our experience in our facility, we've gone through lots of coaches over the years. I know Brett in sports performance, the same thing has happened. Like from day one, there's been a long line of coaches, and you get a chance to reflect and say, could I have done a better job of leading that individual? And what do I want to make sure that I do even better for the next person coming in? And I think that's a great way to self-evaluate sometimes too afterwards, is because sometimes over the years, those relationships, maybe they started out where you were really intentionally mentoring, they became good at what they were doing, and you just kind of let them do their thing. And then by the end of it, you're like, oh man, I haven't even spent any time with him or her, like really pouring into them to become better. And man, I wish I would have. So I think I could have helped prepare them even better for their next job. Maybe that was actually part of the reason why they left, is they felt like I wasn't pouring in enough. You know, like you run through those scenarios in your head a little bit to say, like, man, could I have done better by them along the way and help them become a better coach, or create an environment that they didn't want to leave yet? They wanted to be more a part of what we were doing.
Yes. Yeah. And I also think the flip side happens, when they started, you were a younger coach yourself. I was a younger coach. You were a younger coach. You didn't have the background, the skill set that you have now. And so the way that you began leading them is not the way that you would lead them now if they started today. And that's one of the bigger differences that I'm seeing is I have a different skill set with which I'm able to lead. I have a different amount of time with which I'm able to lead. 5 years ago, I was just worried about keeping the business around, making sure it was there, it was profitable. And so every waking moment went into that. Whereas now we have something that's established. That doesn't need to be my primary thought. And so I can spend a greater amount of time just focusing on the staff, just being with them and helping to develop them so that they can in turn be with the clients. And so I think that just we as leaders and managers are different ourselves. And so we're able to adjust how we present ourselves to these individuals.
Yeah. And I think that ties right into our last topic of the day for today, is the idea in the leadership realm, which I've experienced now as I've been able to interact with different owners, CEOs, directors at levels of all types of different businesses across the country, is the idea of you're so closely tied to the numbers and the revenue piece that we lose track of the investing in the staff piece. And the vicious cycle of that is we stare at these numbers, we don't invest in the staff, the numbers get worse, the staff gets unhappy, the numbers get worse, the staff leaves. And we're like, man, that staff just didn't do what they were supposed to do. And I've had a couple conversations where it comes like, I don't have time to worry about so and so. Like, we have to get this stuff done. And these minimums, we got to get this stuff done. Like, we can't worry about like developing right now. They just have to do this stuff. And I said, but that's why they're not doing this stuff. That's why they're not getting it done, is because that can't be your thought process behind closed doors. And somehow you're not going to have that come across through text, through email, through conversation with that staff. At some point it's going to come out that like it's coming off as this vibe that you don't really care about them as much right now. You just need these numbers to be better. So you just need these guys to do that. And I think it's challenging. And I feel for like Nick, in your position as the owner, when you see like, I got bills and I need money to come in to pay these bills. These guys have salaries and I need to pay their salaries. they need to understand that, and they just need to execute what we talked about. But I've seen when you're able to put that aside and you just double down on investing in them, helping them grow, challenging their growth within what you guys are doing, how those numbers improve dramatically faster than any other motivation could possibly get them going. And it's a tough conversation for, I think, many owners, directors to hear, and even tougher to try to apply.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that I struggle with at times, especially because, I'm an extremely competitive person. I'm extremely competitive with myself. I'm extremely competitive with who we used to be as a company and what our numbers were. I'm competitive with the market and who is around us. And so, my first instinct is I have a goal. I have to attain the goal. I have to be better. I have to achieve more. And so there are times where I can lose sight of the other pieces. And ultimately, I think both for our coaches, but also for our clients too, we have to reflect on, what are we offering? What am I offering to the coaches? What am I offering to the clients? If I'm so worried about, what's coming in, then sooner or later it's not going to be there.
Yeah.
The coaches coming in to work for the company, that's not going to be there. The clients coming in to be a part of us is not going to be there. And so, we have to, like you're alluding to, we have to be continually investing. We have to be continually giving, and knowing that's going to come back around. So investing in our coaches and their education, investing in our clients, and what can we be giving to them? Obviously a great product, but what are the additional things? The ways that we can support them, whether it's going out to games, whether it's giving our clients who are looking to lose weight recipes or other things. It's continually finding ways to give back, and in this case giving back to our staff and helping them to grow and develop, and knowing that when we're taking care of them, they're taking care of the business.
Yeah, for sure. The piece that is so common for people of success, and I'd say when you're at a director level or above, you often have gotten there because of your competitiveness, your work ethic, and your ability to get things done is what gets you there. But your ability to just go in and just put blinders on and get stuff done gets you there, but it also stops you from going further. And that was where I was the most frustrated I've ever been in my position as a director, was that I had gotten to a certain level because I would just put my head down and just go. But then I was kind of capped out. I had a lot of sessions, I had all this, but that wasn't scaling to anyone around me. Right. And I needed to be able to kind of bring other people with to make a bigger impact. And my default is, if something's not going exactly the way that it could go, or I think it should go in many cases, I'll just do it myself. I'll just get it done. It needs to get done, so I'll just do it. And I'm not going to take the time to bring somebody in to do it. And again, that's how I got to a certain level. But leaning into that tendency will always stop the growth to go to the next level. And I think it's really important for us to always keep that front of mind when those moments arise, where it'd be easier for me to just do it on my own. It just needs to get done. I don't have the time to worry about how so-and-so feels about it. I don't have time to worry about creatively having language with them that makes them excited about it, but that's not the best way. It's not wrong. It would still be effective, but it's not the best way to scale what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
It's a tough conversation. I think that it's always one, and I welcome anybody that's listening to this episode that has been in that place that Nick and I just described. I mean, we're open about it. Like we understand that that's not where we want to stay at. And we felt the frustration of trying to do everything ourselves. And it's a great conversation point to get going about, well, what are those action items that you can do next to get out of that? And how do I change my lens so that's not where I'm getting stuck?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So Steve, love having these conversations for our listeners. I hope you guys are following along on our social media, Instagram, Twitter. Got a lot of content going up every week on all aspects, speed, business, and leadership. Hop in on the conversations, interact with us. Let us know what your thoughts are. If you have further questions based on the conversations we're having in this podcast, reach out, let us know. That's the whole goal here, is to continue to interact with you guys. As always, please be sure to rate and review the podcast, the episodes. Just helps us to get out to others and continue to share our message. But Steve, always enjoy these conversations and look forward to the next one.